I'd like to start by thanking Allie Wood, who's granddaughter of Captain Rayal, and she kindly got in touch with her cousins George and Rich, and some of the very early photographs of Captain Rayal's house come from her. And then for Mr. Roland Bodden, I want to thank Shally for agreeing to, she answered lots of questions, gave me family genealogy. She gave me a couple of pictures as well, but she also allowed Stuart Wilson to go into the home of her grandfather, Roland, where she now lives, and do a little videos, which is going to be shown at the end, which I think is a nice touch. Mm-hmm. And I hope it'll bring home some of the things that you're going to hear about to you in a fresh new way. And Mr. Roland Bodden, grandson of Roland Bodden in the story tonight, has already been thanked, and Maria, but I'm grateful to you both as well. There's another lady I want to thank, and she's not here, Rona Banks-Canton, who is very involved in Cayman Connections. And Rona, when I approached her about dates of people's birth and different things, she was very helpful to me, as well as she put me in touch with some shipping records that were very useful for me, and I learned things about Cap Rayal and the whole Bodden family, shipping records that I didn't know about. So finally, I want to thank the staff of the Caymanas National Archive for making a variety of records available to all of us tonight for this talk. They kindly provided me with a file of travel articles they had there. I'd never seen them before. And they got quite excited because these were articles written by people who came to Cayman in the 1800s, starting in the late 1800s. In fact, the first one was the year after Cap Rayal was born, so I figured that was a pretty good starting point. Also, I was able to read some of the oral history interviews there with people who spoke about Rayal and Roland, and so that was very insightful. So thanks to Tricia, Tammy, and Sharice, who did an excellent job over there. Really grateful to them. And I just hope that this flows tonight. It's been a bit of a big thing to piece together. And I'd just like to start off by saying the reason I'm doing this is in support of the work the National Trust does. And one of the second pillars of the National Trust have their emphasis on protecting our environment, but then it is places and sites of historic significance. And I really do believe that unless we understand like the background to buildings and sites and homes, really and truly on their own, they are very dry and boring and not very meaningful. And so this is why, it's such a joy to visit places like the Mission House and know the stories of the people who live there, and to go to the Cincinnati Schoolhouse and hear the stories of what it was like for children who attended there. And so I really want tonight to use this building, which was built in 1939 by a whole team of workmen, and you'll hear references to Captain Rayal thanking his work done at various points in this talk. But men from all over Cayman. But the two ones we're focusing on tonight at this time is limited, we can only do a little bit at a time, and we're going to focus on these gentlemen and the families they came from, the Georgetown they were born into, and we will hopefully walk away with a better understanding and greater appreciation for who they were, and we'll basically come away with wanting to join the Trust in its efforts to preserve buildings and sites of historic significance. So what I plan to do is start in central Georgetown. And I want you to realize that Georgetown is pretty big and spread out. So we could never possibly talk about all of Georgetown. But we'll just sort of, through the men, we'll start down where they were born. And we're going to take in from the museum down to about the lobster pot. is what we're going to be looking at. So that's the northern side of Georgetown. And if you were to break Georgetown up into sections then, and I think it's something we should do, as people, we should think about it historically, but then we should look at Georgetown South. South Sound by itself is another community worth looking at. But tonight, for our purposes, we're going to look, from the museum down to north. We're down near Dixie by the lobster pot and the Catalogue house, okay? And that's what old timers call that section. That's where you have some of the newcomers that still on new bases where you can hear about the cemetery. And that's what our focus will be. So I'm going to read until I get comfortable, so my apologies. If these walls could talk, they would have plenty to tell you. They've been building me now, the buildings, for several months, and I'm up to the Belton. I'm overhearing workmen chat amongst themselves every day. I'm learning lots about these characters. There are two men here, two brothers. One is the main man in charge, and the other seems to be overseeing most of the carpentry work and helps with just about everything else too. I've learned a lot about their family, where they grew up. This place called Georgetown, and they call it the capital, and how people lived in the 1880s. Let me tell you some of what I've learned. Rayal and Roland are the name of these men, and their father was James Roland. That's a picture of the two gentlemen we're featuring tonight, Rayal and Roland. And their father was James Roland Bodden, and their mother was Elizabeth, known as Liza Caroline Bodden, a sweet soul, I'm told, loved by everyone. They were born in a home built by their father on North Church Street, across from where Burger King is today, if you want to put in their context. Their father was a leading shipbuilder, and his shipyard was just alongside the path leading up to their beautiful wooden home with its porch and surrounded by fruit trees bearing pine. Roland and Rayal had two sisters, so this was a family of 7. Parents and 3 girls and 2 boys, which was pretty typical at that time. As the slide will show you, these men came from a long line of people involved in seafaring. When you look at the birth certificates of their children, you'll see on there that the occupations listed were mariners, fishermen, masters of vessels, ship's owners, and ship's builders. That is the line you're coming from. I think one really interesting feature is the date of birth of the first bond we have on record, as far as I know. And folks, that I might not be 100% accurate in everything, but this I've done the best I can. And the earliest date for someone in the family line is John Bodden, who seems to have been born about 1760. Now, for those of you who know a bit about Cayman history, that's only about 20 years after the first land grants. So what we're looking at here in this family is a group of people who've been in Cayman pretty much from the very beginning when the settlement began. Okay? Because Mary Bodden got her land grant in 1741 or something like that. So, and this is 1760. And she came across, and you will know from your history that she's supposedly settled in Bodden town. But then we have to presume that many of the Boddens came down to Georgetown as well. Okay? So the great-grandfather of Rayal and Roland, William James, and the grandfather, John Clark, these would have all been men who would have lived during all those key points in our history, the magistrates and, the establishment of the first government in 1832 and all of this at Pedro St. James, which we know pretty well. So I just wanted to point those things out to you. So each successive generation passed on their skills and knowledge to the next, a kind of apprenticeship type thing from in this family. So James Roland must have been thrilled when his son Rayal was born in 1885 and Roland in 1888. 2 boys to teach the trade to, so dearly loved. Many of their neighbors, I think now of that street that we referenced at the beginning, from opposite Burger King coming up to Mary Street. On that street, there are many of us in the room here who can remember when, you know, there were shipbuilders and sailmakers and turtlers and riggers. Those were the kinds of occupations people would have had. So you would see houses with shipyards in them, boat sheds, sail lofts in people's yards, catboats and dugouts would be pulled up all along the little bays. And I'm told that all those little bays had names. I don't know what they are, but I think that's a really fun project for the Georgetown people to get on with. And so, yeah. Often when these people heard that sail ho ringing through the air, and they dropped what they were doing to race down to the shore and look to windward or look whichever direction the sail was coming from, they'd see that. They'd see a beautiful Cayman-built schooner coming up from West Bay or around Southwest Point with its sails billowing. Waterproofs, like this, they said. And also daily, as the fishermen would go out and catch the fish and bring them in to those little bays and so on, someone would blow a conch shell to let the ladies or the men, whoever was at home, know that they caught something and they would come and get some fish to buy. So, if these sails could, if these walls could talk, they would say that these men were born in the capital, Georgetown, just a ways down from their home. So we know that that is Hogstad Bay as we know it now, and of course that was the original name, which was changed to Georgetown in 1800. So as you walk from their home up to the capital, you would cross a lot of beautiful old wooden homes with sand yards full of flowers and ground provisions and so on. That's the kind of scene that you would cross going by. Many visitors to the islands spoke about the beauty of the homes of Georgetown. The early articles talk about how the homes lined the coast, and in fact, it said that all districts were the homes lined the coast of the building, the communities were based around the coastline. So once you reached the center of town in Hogstad Bay, that's where you found your government office, and that is where you would find the old courthouse was like the government admin building, which is where the museum is now. Because that was not just the courthouse, but it was also the post office. And there was a jail there as well. So you went to court and then you went to jail. Okay? And the shopkeepers, there were a few stores up and down, and you just sort of went into the shops. The shop didn't have much of anything really in the early, late 1800s, early 1900s. Just basics. But also in the along the coast there, you would see that there was a turtle market, and turtles were butchered there often, and that was a staple food. Now, this actually is a description from the visitor of a governor, Sir Henry Morgan, in 1884. He was on tour here on some ship called the Griffin. So I'm just going to pick out keywords. There was a church, called the Catalogue Church. I don't know what that meant back then, but I'm sure it was pretty small. There was a school, the courthouse and Christmas, he said. And, you know, the people all arrived on the schooners, and they were all manned by Caymanans. And typical size of them was 50 to 90 tons, whatever that means. I think some of you gentlemen understand what that means. And often they would also see schooners of that size being built in the harbor. For our purposes, as you know, thinking of what the homes look like and so on, they were basically very small and modest and comfortable. But whoever visited and stayed for a while talked about how well built they were and how well furnished they were. There was a lot of small tables and locally made chairs and things like this. People farmed and grew the crops they needed. It seems like it was a very self-sufficient society, and these are some of the things that they grew: the coconuts, maize, sugarcane, brown provisions. They reared cattle, swine, and poultry, but their main source of meat was turtle meat. The main occupation in that day was turtling, and remained so until about the 60s. Their father, Roland and Ray's father, built many turtle schooners from the hardwood found on the island. And this hardwood, from as far back as when Caymanas discovered, was that even in the when Drake came by in the late 1580s, that was the thing that Sir Francis Drake's crew spoke about. They mentioned all the animals, the crocodiles, the alligators, and the turtles that were here in abundance. But, you know, the woods, they talked about it being a very wooded place. And that just continues. It's interesting how that was what the Cayman Islands were provided with. You know, when you think about that term we use all the time, out upon the seas, you have to think about what we found here. And it was food and things to build your homes from and so on. And this is a couple hundred years beyond that, 200 years or so after. Not much has changed. It's still very isolated and so on. But from the mahogany and so on, the natural bent that they would go inland and get the bent branches that would allow them to build their ships. They also exported this hardwood abroad from time to time. And of course, schooners and catboats that would be outside in the harbor there would be used in the early days to go fishing for turtles off the coast of Central America, and there was a lot of trading back and forth. Caymans had a lot of coconuts and turtles to Jamaica, and you know, they'd go there with the things to trade, and they'd come back with things like cornmeal and flour and those things. A lot of the documents talk about fabric for dresses and things of that nature. So also from a 1800s report I read, it was said that everyone owned their own house and plot of land. When men were not away at sea turtling or on voyages to southern U.S. ports, they would be working ashore. So it seemed like men would turtle or farm, and that would be pretty much all that they would need. So then I want to just look at Captain Rayal's childhood a little bit for us, to see what life was like back then for children growing up. We don't have a lot. Did I go the right direction? Yeah, I think that's where I need to be. One of his earliest memories was of his grandfather, John Clark, carting him a boat at age 4. Like all the kids back then, they went to school. Actually, I have to be here. Sorry, still there. When they went to school. They went at age 7 and left at 14. Rayal remembered in a Northwestern interview back in '74 going to school on the first day wearing a skirt, which was what boys and girls wore. So that was his style. And he talked about his teachers and so on, but he concentrated, he said, in his senior year on arithmetic, shorthand, and counting. And when you hear more about his later life, you'll realize how valuable particularly shorthand and counting were. Rayal turned out to be really a businessman. So, so let's just look now at what happened after they finished their schooling years. So at that point, what would normally happen would be that they'd start building the ships alongside their father in the shipyard. So this next one shows, as far as I can tell, some of the ships that this family built under the direction of their father. So they would be straight out of school, and so if you look at it, it kind of looks like every couple of years almost, they're building a ship or two. Now, I don't know if this is exhaustive, but this is what I found, and it's all I can sort of share with you at this time. They didn't only build ships for local folk, but they built ships for people on commission from Jamaica and other places. It's interesting to note the connection between Cayman and the southern U.S. Cities. I don't know the full explanation for all of it from as far back as when these young men were, right out of school. They were going off to places like Mobile, Alabama, and this was where they would go. So at the age of 15, in 1903, Roland Jr., or Roland Archibald, went off with his father, James Roland, to Mobile. And they seemed to stay there for a while. And I believe that now that these young men, I mean, I'm kind of speculating here, but I guess, the families are thinking about things like building homes and getting materials and so on. And I'm sure there are other people who do the same thing. And when you see the homes coming up, you'll realize that this was the period of time when they were getting their materials from the southern USA, because these homes look so very southern. So over the next 8 years, they would have all worked on some of these ships listed here in this slide. So now out of school and in their late teens, early 20s, it's time to start thinking about getting married. Finding a wife and settling down. So for young men in that generation, that meant with building a house for the person you're going to marry. It's a whole different way of living your life back then. So that's what they did. There was sufficient family land where their homes were located there opposite Burger King for them to build near to their parents. So Rayal, the older one, was the first to marry, and he married Miss Annabelle, called Pedley Bodden, of Georgetown in 1910. And they moved into their home not long after. And this is a picture that I got from George Abdy-Williams of the first home, probably taken about 1915. So it's a beautiful home. You can see it's built out of shiplap siding. You see all the fretwork around the porch. The windows are those sash windows, and they have lovely shutters on them. Notice the water catchment at the back of it. So not a cistern, but some sort of drum that looks almost like, it looks like a drum. But it's little features like that I find interesting, and I think really say a lot about the time. It's really a beautiful home. It was like something you'd see in the southern USA. And I imagine that many of the materials came from over there too. But I'm pretty sure that inside there was a lot of furniture that was made in Cayman. Now, Roland, the younger, built his home between his father's home and his brother's home over the next few years also. He married in 1915 Kathleen Lucille Hines of South South. And that family had 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls as well. So you see that they didn't just choose wives from right in their neighborhood. They went a little further afield. And I think one of the earlier generations married at Parsons. I wasn't sure if it was a Georgetown Parsons or a Westgate Parsons. Any of you Parsons know? Okay. But little things like that, I think that one of the fun things is hearing about how people got acquainted and the marriages across the districts and stuff like that. We have one in our family about my grandfather, my mother's side. His sister was on the beach with some of her siblings, and a catboat came by, a Georgetown catboat came by, and they're visiting people down, relatives further along. He saw this woman on the beach, and that was it. They ended up marrying, and he came back, and so on. It's kind of fun, to hear these stories. We've got more romances across the north now, where West England married the north side men, and all those trips across the southern moonlight lakes, the catboats, and so on. Anyway, Captain Rayal recalls building his first ship, the Bird, the same year he got married. And by the way, this is a picture of Roland Bodden House as it is today. I put it in black and white, and your wingsuit that you will see it in full color. So, sorry, I had a mishap with this presentation last night. and I ended up having to redo it like at 7 o'clock this morning. The birth should be 1910. You stay there to be married. Yeah. Seems 25 when he built his first ship. Building of a ship always culminated in that hugely anticipated boat launching. And this was no different for him. It was, we heard lots about the boat launchings. They were like a holiday with lots of food, bands, and so on. And that deserves a whole talk of its own. So you can imagine how life would have been for these 3 families living near to each other. I've done that. Supporting each other day by day with children and caring for the older folk and so on. So they'd be supporting each other. And this, I have a little surprise for you. This was a surprise for me. In that I discovered through Shawnee that actually the grandfather's house still exists, but it's been moved from the site. So this is another thing about the old houses, and it's actually relocated just before you get to Pedro St. James. It was moved there when Atlantic Department Store went up, and it was taken. Have I got my facts straight? It was taken by Kenneth Whedon, and then with Tommy Hilston asked it to be moved up there. Some of you my age in the room, I won't say how old that is, remember that as the Dr. McGregor house, where when our parents took us to see Dr. McGregor, that was the old James Roland house, and I had no idea that it still existed. So I kind of got that back a little bit. Too late for me to do much more than just go take a picture, and I took it black and white as well. So they supported each other very well, and so on, and that was typical back then, the way people lived. So it looks like they must have built about 8 more ships together between the Bird and the Atwood Carson in 1917. And I'm pointing that out too because 1917 is a big year for this family. Roland and Rayal were married and they started their families. But typical of Cayman men back then, they still, and life was going well, they were making money and so on, they were looking outwards to improve their lives. And where Cayman men normally look is these days. And so they were keen to check out life abroad. And you see that in Caymanians, the history of Caymanian people. They're unafraid to leave and emigrate if needs be. So in 1917, the family headed off and they entered through Key West on one of the ships called the Fomar, and they set up home in Florida. James Roland, the father, and Roland Archibald, the son, they actually set up a shipyard in Tampa and worked side by side for about 3 years, building 3-masted schooners in Tampa. Gabriel talked about this in a Northwestern magazine in 1974. He said he didn't go study, he had enough in shipbuilding then. And he decided to go and do some, sail around a bit. And that's exactly what he did. And he said he traveled around for a change, sailing in the U.S. Lighthouse service, and later he went as quartermaster on a passenger cargo ship. And he refers, though, to his brother and dad working in Tampa. And he said, my brother Roland was his right-hand man there. And I can tell you, Roland was one of the best ship's carpenters ever produced in these islands. As proof, he added, just look at the doors of the town hall. He built them. As an aside, Roland's prowess as a carpenter was mentioned in several memorandum pieces that I read as well. Mr. Elroy spoke about it, and Mr. Arthur Arch also spoke about it. And I just think if you look up at these ceilings, we're looking up at that, and just keep that in mind. So Captain Rayal then described how all of them soon discovered that life was really not a whole lot better over there, and they all decided to come back home and to start back with the shipbuilding. So he described how on the return journey, the schooner to the ceiling got caught up in a hurricane, and that they only survived by cutting loose the deck cargo. So I think that time abroad tells us a little bit about these two gentlemen, the two ones who we're looking at, Rayal and Roland, their personalities, their strengths, and their attributes, and how they developed, and then how they became the men that we in the 70s knew so well. Rayal, the older one, seems to be, if you think about how he made those choices in 1970, he was more adventurous, he was looking for new challenges and changes, and he liked sort of being in charge of people and things. He was a bit of a risk taker, I think. On the other hand, Roland was quieter, and he was more of a skilled tradesman and artisan kind of thing. But together, they worked really well and complemented each other in the building of the houses, which came later, these civic buildings. When the time came for them to work in building the buildings, their personalities and background experience came into play. So then on their return home in 1920, some of their best building days lay ahead of them, both in shipbuilding and in the building of these civic buildings that we come to know so well. We have Elmsley Memorial in 1920, the town hall next door in 1923, and the motor vessel Simcoco the following year. Yeah. Okay. Just a couple of tidbits about Elmsley. I don't know how much you know about it, but that's a funny story about how Elmsley was built. Captain Rayal had no background experience yet in building buildings of that nature. And the people of the church had decided that it was time to replace the old church that was there with a new one. And an architect in Jamaica came up with a plan, and it required building it in blocks. Well, there was nobody in Cayman who knew how to work with cement. And so he said, well, I'm willing to learn. And he headed off to Jamaica to put a cement company and went off and learned. They had the blocks, what are they called? What are those molds? The molds. They had the molds, but no one knew how to mix the cement and so on. And he went ahead, and the architect, when he was asked about it, whether he thought this man could do it, he said, well, anyone can build a ship. Anyone who can build a ship can build a church, but not everyone who can build a church can build a ship. So he was willing to take a bet on him. So in spite of the fact that he didn't have any prior experience working with this, he got the commission. So Elmsley Memorial Church, as we know, is the first concrete building in Cayman. And, it's an interesting building in many ways. It took them 2 years to build. And you can say that the Roland and Rayal cut their teeth on building Elmsley. It was a very long, slow process. And it seems like they got faster with the other buildings in the years that came by. The timber in Elmsley was salvaged from a shipwreck. And the ceiling and all the buildings, the ceiling and this one is more the workmanship of Roland, along with several other well-known shipbuilders maybe around Cayman who joined them on their team. I heard that from Northside, there's a gentleman called Max Miller who came to town to work with them on some of these buildings. Of course, when you look at this ceiling and all that, it's like the upturned hull of a schooner. So the pews in Elmsley were made out of mahogany from Belize. They cost £5 each, and members of the congregation paid for it their own pew, and they became affectionately known as family feuds. Everybody went and sat in the same place every Sunday. And the opening of Nelson was really a big deal back in December 22. It was built in the shape of a cross. There were 3, the main door, and then you have the 2 side doors. So they had 3 ladies, 3 very prominent ladies were there to open it. The commissioner's wife opened one, Miss Hetty opened another, and the wife of the minister, Reverend Dixon, opened the third. When Reverend Dixon spoke, and I got this information at the Gleaner account of it, he spoke particularly about the parents of these men. He said they must be so proud of their sense of accomplishment. He also went on to say, Commissioner Hutchings went on to say, the fact should not be forgotten that this has been erected entirely by Island labor. That fact should not be forgotten, and its remembrance should be in days to come a great incentive to effort and achievement. And I think that's what's so special about these buildings. It was a time when, you just know that the work that was done on the buildings was done by the people who lived here, whose roots went deep. Now, Captain Rayal, and I just want to share what he said in reply to everything at the end. He said, the faithfulness of the workmen who assisted me. He said he wanted to contribute to that because a foreman without a workman is like a captain without a crew. I'm glad to say that there has always been harmony between myself and the workmen, and to them as much as to me who own this building. So it shows how much he appreciated the work of everyone. Then they built the town hall, and that was a commotion because people complained about the cost of it. They said it was too big, it was too grandiose, and it was too expensive, and we didn't need it. Sounds like Cayman today. But anyway, it became the center of community life for many years. This was where all the important government national events were held. This is like, the courts building now that was down by the dock, or down at the museum now. It all moved here. So you had courts, and then it became the center of all your social life as well. You had the dances, you had the plays, and everything going on in there. A lot of us remember having our first plays in there when we went to school back here. Now, in 1925, a family moved to Cayman from the States. And they had a 12-year-old daughter, and she kept notes of her time in Cayman. And a few years back, she wrote this book. I don't know how many of you have seen it. I don't even know if it's still in print. But this is one of the most lovely books about Cayman, 1925 to 1927 now. This is what I'm going to show a lot of pictures now and stop talking. Or we're going to all interact with these photos. Her name was Verona Booker. She married and became a Coleman. Boy, she had some stories to tell and pictures to help her remember her 3 years on what she called an idyllic island back then. So I want to invite us to take a look at some of the photos her father took and are available to us at the National Archive. I got a collection of them because I think what I'm trying to do is get you all to get the feeling for what Cayman was like back then. Not focusing too much on how buildings were built or anything. So this is an early picture of the harbor. And you can see on the left-hand side, a big boom there where they would lift heavy cargo. You can see below that a dugout that was mentioned. So you can see how different it is. This building here is what was called the old ice cream parlor. That is the Oakwood's building there. And I think that's about as many things as I remember. I had a session with that call. Okay. And then this is the other, looking at it from the other side, and that's the government boat launch here, where Mr. Roddy Waller and all of that. And when the sailing ships would come in, that would go out like a tender kind of thing to meet all the visiting ships and things of that sort. And this was, I think, Comfort Bodden's shop that got turned around. This, I am told, Kathy, was a Marion store that had, which Marion had? Marion had his first press. Oh, no, that's not it. No, that's what I was told. But anyway, we could all have a separate meeting about trying to identify things. Apparently, the building right behind the courthouse was Marion's, the old Marion's building. Was it there in 1925? Yeah, it started. Okay, so I didn't pick any pictures. I was just focusing on the waterfront right now. I'll have to do the other streets and so on another time. Okay, I love this one. That building where the men are all standing, you recognize the seawall. And here's just a group of guys standing, look lovely the way they're dressed. That's the turtle market that they're standing alongside. And the sort of the building is the Webster store here. The Webster store, and I'm not sure what that building is. Kathy, do you know what that building is? I would have thought the small one. That was a house. That was a house. And here is what? Who knows what's on that thing? What's that? Sundial. I know, John, you know it all. John's done so much research. You're going to have to do a separate one, John. Okay, I love this one. This is just 1925. Look at the streets. I mean, you know, they're just nothing but a path. And what a contrast. You have a man here in his full suit. You have a man on a donkey or a mule. You have a car, someone walking down the road here. It looks like a commissioner or something. It just, there's so much in that. Kathy, notes say this is a Marion warehouse. Could that be a Marion warehouse? Do you have a clue? No, that's Marion's at the, where you see the tree on the right? Mm-hmm. That's Marion's behind it. Behind it? Yeah. But no, that's the whole shed road, right at the very end of the back. Okay, back there. Yes. Because this is meant to be the waterfront, I think. No, that's shed road. That's shed road. Okay. Well, I think even the notes need some updating, so that's why I'm sharing them, because I'm like, I don't think we need to do some work on these pictures. And this is now in that time at shop with, I don't know if it's the same guy in the built on here or not, but, and I'm curious, I'm wondering what in the world he has in those bags. Anyone want to guess? You think it's wood, or what do you think? I don't know. Kind of limited. Sometimes see, look kind of back. Could be. Yeah. And I think this piece of equipment here, is that a windlass or something? I don't even know what that is. Is that something to do with ships or something? But I do know that this gentleman here was a visitor, and he was a journalist, and this was an artist, Fink, and this was England, Arthur England, and Fink, talking to the old gentleman with the white hair. But I mean, just imagine, you know, how we've changed. Yeah. This is the middle of town, and that's what it looked like, you know? And that's a nice old picture of the courts building. Now, one of the things it talks about the homes. And so I tried to find a picture of a home going that way, okay? And this, we know, we all know Marindale, and we know McCoy's Villa, and they still have the names, right? But apparently this was really common back then. All the houses did. Anyone knows whose house this is going north? It's actually the home of Granger, Ben Granger, who was an American who came here, and his wife was Belle Granger. His wife was Vim Granger who married Mr. Berkeley Bush so it was right there, almost to the right of 4th Street coming down. I don't know what the word Catalogue means, but we all remember the fencing like this. And I think the typical homes went all the way down. When you think of the McTaggart homes, Ainsley, Mr. Ainsley Bodden's home. For those who are new to Cayman, we're talking now about homes from 4th Street. What's that little bar called on the left there?
Oh, Sam Dollar.
Sam Dollar, going all the way down to Lobster Pot. So you see the houses like that. Yes, Grace.
Yeah, this is a question. So this gentleman that owned this home would be the father-in-law of Mr. Berkeley?
Yeah. And I've got a picture coming up that I don't remember. This is the outside of this home. You have a question? Yeah. Would that be where Mr. Berkeley's house was? I think you're right, Charlie. I think I don't know whether Miss Dim and Mr. Berkeley ended up, building on to one of these homes. I can't quite figure it all out. I didn't have a chance to investigate it any further. I guess my guess is that's where it is. Now the next picture is like a period piece, because we saw the people in the donkeys and we saw the average Joe in the middle of the day. Now, apparently, and Mr. Paul has verified this to me, people got together socially on what? And they played cards. I had no idea. This was a done thing. Some of the more influential people. And this picture has got a group of expats and Caymanans hanging out together in the evening. Inside that house, inside the Granger house. Okay? And according to the records, according to what I've been told, this gentleman here is Clifton Hunter.
Oh, wow.
A young Clifton Hunter who was probably a teacher in Georgetown at the time. Yes, Austin? He was a bootlegger who came to Cayman. Oh yeah, so that's very important. I didn't know whether to say it or not. But he had the what was it called? The Neighbors Bar? Cap Ben's Bar? Okay. Yeah. So that's really important. I forgot to mention that. So and there he is himself, right there. There's Cap Ben. And there's his wife, Belle. Okay, that gentleman next to them is the doctor from Jamaica, Dr. Overton. And then, honestly, I also can firmly identify 2 others because of my knowledge of the mission house. What do you all see in here for those good mission house teachers who added on the second roof? The Lyons, Mr. and Mrs. Lyons. Okay, playing cards. Now, it says that this lady here is Aggie Bodden. Who was Aggie Bodden? I don't know. Jasmine, you can help me? I know the name.
I think she was on Clerk.
Okay, well,
We had a
maybe.
house in Bodden.
Okay.
The ruins are still, the ruins of the house is still there.
So, but this is Georgetown. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
Zionist house is still.
Okay, and then I believe that's a young Francis Bodden. And then there are 2 people here, and then it says Mr. and Mrs. Hutchings, but I don't know. I don't see anybody there that looks like Hutchings to me. I don't know exactly who. So honestly, in dealing with these photos, we got made notes, but we're not 100% sure. I'm just intrigued by, you can see it's a basic little small room and everything. The shiplap siding and the family photos and a little bit of, it's just interesting. It's a period piece that is so lovely. And I had never seen it before. I was helping out with the school group that came through the other day. It was on display to show how the archive was able to restore old torn up pictures. Okay, so I'm just putting in a plug there for them, okay? And I got permission to use it. Okay, this is another one that ties in with the Bodden family. Because look, that is
this young lady's friend, Caroline, Miss Caroline, one of the daughters of Captain Rayal, look at the street here, the old house, and by now, Elmsley has been built, and you've got the cement wall. He's now added on a cement wall, which I think is so intriguing. And she's standing on the bay, right, Roland?
Yeah.
And look at the amount of grass there. Is that still there? I never go down there. Does anybody go down on the bay by opposite times? I mean, look how plentiful it was. It was really in abundance. And he has a car in the yard by then. I don't know. And then there's a gentleman walking behind in his full suit. And I have something interesting. Am I talking too long? Do I need to stop? Okay. Yeah. Mr. Paul told me that the shops in Georgetown all closed at 1 o'clock every Thursday. And he said on Saturdays, religiously, the men of Georgetown put on their full suits and they got their canes and they all went down to that sea wall and they just hung out. They just hung out. I said, well, what did they drink? Did they go to Captain Ben's bar and drink? He said, no. It was like a thing that men did back then. They just went to shoot the breeze and just talk and visit.
Sit down on the one break, 3 and talk, and you call it Rover's Park.
What is it?
You used to sit down on the one break. You're right by the military there. I had a coffee this morning.
Oh, so that's what they did up north.
Yeah. Call it Rover's Park.
What sort of park?
Rover's Park.
The tree was had fallen, so it was like a bench, and then all the great trees surrounding it. It was perfect for them to go there and and sit down and talk.
How long ago was that? More like the 70s and 60s? Kind of thing? Yeah.
But this
Okay. But I just thought this is so beautiful for 1920s, a young lady outside her, and she was one of her friends, one of the Coleman's friends. So I just wanted to include that and tie it in. And of course, they went to the beach, and there's a beautiful 7 Mile Beach back in 1925.
That's what we had.
So the beach was a beach, and there was no development at all. And there's a group of Cayman bathing beauties at the beach. We don't know who they are, but just a group of friends and family. That was typical of the swimsuits they wore. And then when Georgetowners would oftentimes go off to spots at Newlands. So this looks like I think this is actually a church gathering, and you can see the twists and spots behind them. So let me see if I can get back. We've done the pictures. All right. So the men are back, and they built an Elmsley in the town hall. And the next sort of significant date I want to mention is to do with building the Simboco, which was in 27. And that vessel, as we know, there's a painting of the Simboco, right? No, sorry, got the wrong.
This one.
Yeah, okay. But the Simboco, as we know, was a motorboat. So this, I think, was their foray into building motorized vessels. And they, again, Roland had a challenge. Just like with Elmsley, he faced something where he had to go off and get a qualification in order to install the engine. Because it seems that just as the vessel was being completed, he talked about how a law was passed in Jamaica that required that any vessel with an engine over 100 horsepower had to be approved by a British licensed engineer. So he said, well, I'm going to go take the engineering license. And he did. He studied, and he went out and did it. And they installed a 200 horsepower Bollinger engine in it when it arrived, and he took it off then to Jamaica. He says, he applied for the examination, completed it within 4 hours. And the following day, he was then licensed up to install 500 horsepower gas or diesel engines. And he was told that he was the first to get a British license of that kind in Jamaica. And many of you know that Simboco was known for so many things, and she was the lifeline between Cayman, Jamaica, and the States. But one really significant trip was when she took the 200 volunteer Caymanian men from to serve in the Trinidad Royal Navy in the war. He was on board as the chief engineer then. Now this picture, sadly, is a bit of, you're talking seamanship, the seaman. Tragedy struck this family in 32 when they lost one of their special boats built by the family. It was built by Roland Bodden, their grandfather, and his cousin down the road, Mr. Laurence Bodden. That's where it's R.L. Husper. It's the R and the L stand for the initials of the two men. It was on its maiden voyage, and it encountered the 32 storm. And it had a lot of people on board. A lot of families lost multiple family members in this thing. It was really one of the big tragedies. Roland lost Ralph Garden, was his name, his son called Ralph, his second child. And it was only by God's grace that your father, Roland, was not on board. I think he was due to be on board it, but had to make changes in his plans. So that would have been another multiple loss. So I just mention it, you see these boats and the pictures of them, but there's a story behind many of them. Bob Solo lost 2 brothers, and there was a lady, I'm told, who lives right down opposite the National Trust office, who lost 3 sons. So when these things happened in Cayman, the community was rocked, with a lot of grief. So leaving that sad story behind me, just jumping back now to the next thing they built was the town clock in 1937. And then the public library in 1939, and the post office as well in 1939. So the 20s and 30s were filled with a lot of activity and excitement and sadness as well. So they continued building their ships, and they continued building the buildings, and these things all alongside the turtle trade, which was going on actively at that time, anchoring our economy. There, at this time, too, under Cardinal, we had road projects and other job opportunities coming online. Now, just going back to the house down the road here, Captain Rayal's in particular, I want us to just look at some of the changes he made as of about 1940. He began making changes to his house about this time. Oh, I got cat roads and things like that, but that's okay. So this is the house we've seen up to now with the fence in front of it. Thanks to George for supplying that. I had not seen these before. But in about 1940, you can see, we can go back and forth here a little bit. What he's done is he decides to expand the porch area, more than likely because of the impact of climate and who knows, insects or whatever. He's going to make some changes here, and he's going to add cement now to it. So he extends out this little portice here to both sides. And when you see the next picture, you can see that these little wood bits remain, but all the wooden pillars and so on get removed. Okay, so there's a side view. And this is the house most of us remember, right? And it's interesting, this is a side view that thanks to the trust, they gave me this picture. Sorry, when I lost it last night, my credits got lost. Here's the original house. This is also, I guess original inside, but now a porch covering it completely. Okay, it's interesting to see the roof lines along there and then the porch as well. John, am I missing anything?
It was an enclosed site which everything screened.
Oh, yeah. Was it anything that probably was taken after it was turned into a restaurant, because Uncle Rail didn't have a screened porches for you.
Yeah.
It was just.
Yeah, I think this one, might be open, but extremely distant. Yes, that's what I get to next. Okay, and here's a thank you, John, for this photo. This is a John Doe photo. This was it as as a restaurant and so on. Okay, in the 70s. Who remembers the Cook restaurant? Before it was just before the grand old house became the place. Lots of us have happy memories of family reunions. And yes, the family talked about how their grandmother had a hammock in every room. And she said her grandma had one even in the small dining room next to her kitchen. Sorry, she said she remembers her laying in a hammock and peeling the skins off walnuts and coconuts and putting them on the fire to stew them. Miss Hetty loved to travel, and she would always go up to Miami to visit her children when the plane started flying, and I bet she went a lot on the ships as well. And a lot of us remember how she'd bring home clothes, and sometimes we'd get to stop there and buy things from her, all the good things she brought in from Miami. But Miss Hetty also liked taking her Cayman food to her family in Miami. They said that she would cook red beans and everything and take it through that customs place and just feed up all the Caymanas in Miami. So let's just quickly finish up here at the library then. This was built in 1939. It's been standing proud now, ladies and gentlemen, for 82 years. So we mentioned the ceiling before. I just want to mention a couple of things. The beams are original and they're bolted into place rather than nailed. And you see the shields at the end. The ones on the side are shields of universities in England, each one of them. So this is a kind of a buttress, the buttress ceilings, the beams, and outside of the door and even inside, you see the fan at the above the door. That is original. In the 70s, they added on the little extension at the front, but they kept that, and the keystone is still there. So public works did a good job on that. Remember that when Rayal and Roland are building this, they're midlife. They're 54 and 51. They've had a history of shipbuilding behind them. They're not young men. And they bring to this site lots of experience. Now, just a couple of other things that the walls of this building will remember. Two more things. Back in the Second World War, the U.S. Navy set up a base here, right around the back. Sorry, that's an old photo of the library as it was when it was originally built. And here's an aerial shot from a collection at the National Archive of some of the men who were in the U.S. Navy. And what I want to say about this is that this was a very interesting time in our history, but I love this picture because it puts the whole town in perspective. Look at the green, first of all. Okay, here's the library, and behind it is your U.S. base. The town hall, the town clock, go straight down, and there's the fort, and the Dobson Hall. The Parsons family live here, and Elmsey is just along the way. That's Mr. Williams' shop, for those of you who went to school behind here about 10 years later. And we all remember eating their Paradise Plum and kept the candy from Mr. Williams' shop. This was a beautiful park where the Legislative Assembly, Princess Royal Park. And yes, we all have, I heard the Merrymen there for the first time as a school child. And it's one afternoon in our school uniform, we went down and just enjoyed it. All along here are those homes lining and going up north, okay? This was a Stedman Bodden house. This has been relocated from Georgetown too, and is on Old Prospect Road, opposite the Prospect Youth Center. Just beyond that, if you see that house, you will know that it was once right here in Georgetown. This is the home of Innes MacTaggart, and his home was called Glenwood. Why I don't know, these funny names. But Mr. Ennis built the original mahogany tables that were used in this library. And they were beautiful. Those of us who remember being in here as kids, because in 1949, the Presbyterian Church opened, they took the grounds of this US base, they got rid of all these temporary straw-covered ones, and the more sort of sturdy wooden ones became our school. The primary was over here. That was groups 1 to 5. And the lab was over here behind the library. Some stories, if you get a bunch of people who came, they'll tell you about almost burning the place down. And then the other groups were here, but I remember the high school buildings were over here. Back this area was called Cuttabush. I don't know why. And that's where we went for mangoes and gimmicks for break and lunch. Oh. And a lot of us have memories of this library coming in as children, but we also have memories of sitting outside it, waiting for parents to pick us up, because, you know, it was a whole different world back in the 50s and 60s then. So let me try wrapping this up, because I've gone down memory lane far too long, I think. Was there anything else? I mentioned school and I mentioned that. So I'd just like to conclude by leaving you with this thought. The homes and buildings we've spoken about are tangible connections to our past, and it's my hope that this talk tonight has helped you appreciate that each structure built by our ancestors tells a story of lives lived in a bygone era worth remembering and cherishing. Hopefully you'll see the value of joining the trust in its mission to preserve places of historic significance for present and future generations, and to foster an ongoing appreciation for the same. Now, Stuart, do you want to come and show the little video quickly? Sorry, it's a bit long. Video, Stuart Caymanas, the Historic Programs Manager of the Trust, has made a video that he's going to share that kind of hopefully will bring it all together.
Story of Captains Rayal and Roland Bodden is one of the first 5 generations in Caymanas history, and even around the world, as the immense British province was renowned both near and far. The granddaughter of Roland Bodden, Shalene Bodden, spoke with the National Trust for the Cayman Islands about their lives and gave us a candid look at the men whose structures still stand tall around the capital city of Grand Cayman.
I think it was just from their father before them, you know, who was into carpenter work and shipbuilding. My grandfather and one of his cousins, Captain Laurie Bodden, they built a boat called the Arthurlyn, and she used to run between here and the US, but unfortunately on her maiden voyage, she was lost in a storm.
Many of the more well-known structures in Georgetown built by the men include the post office, the public library, the Elmsley Memorial Church, and the Peace Memorial. Known for their shipbuilding, Roland and Rail paid homage to their love for the art form in many of the buildings they built, and this influence can be seen in the roofing of the structures they left behind.
Have you been into Elmsley Memorial Church?
Yes.
Have you seen his plaque in there?
No.
Well, when you walk into the front door of Elmsley, if you turn to your right, there's a plaque there for my grandfather.
Okay.
And it's because he did all the ceiling work, you know, all those beams. That's all his handiwork.
Yeah, like a ship.
Right. And you'll find them in the post office. You'll find them in the town hall, in the library. You'll find them all over. You know, yeah. Rail was like the one to do the talking.
Grandpa was just the worker, so, which was fine with him. They worked together. They were, I guess, as close as any two people could be. They really worked very well together. And that's why I'm so happy now that he is being recognized for, his work.
You're going to call me, say what I was about to say.
I just want to say thank you everyone for joining us tonight. This is thank you everyone for joining us tonight at this very special evening. We have Miss Arthurlyn Pedley. Arthurlyn, thank you so much for all your work. Clerk, your hand on this Again, thank you everyone for giving your support to the National Trust. We really appreciate it. A huge thank you to our headline sponsor, Mr. Rayal and Bodden. Thank you so much. And Ms. Rayal Bodden for sharing your artwork with us tonight. That was a real treat to see your paintings. And Ms. Sankta, thank you also for your artwork as well. You did some original sketches of National Trust sites. First, if you all get a chance to walk around and look at the artwork at the back there. A huge thank you to my team, Stuart, Kathy, and the rest of the National Trust staff for all their hard work that they put into helping us make this event happen. On another note, we just launched our youth stewardship program this week. It's been very exciting, and we're delighted to say that two of our youth stewards are here tonight with us, Ms. Darlene and Danielle. And if you enjoyed tonight's guest speaker lecture, we have another one coming up May 25th at our clubhouse at Dark Park at 5:30, 6:30 p.m. It will be hosted by Ben Sadling. He's going to be talking about bats, and he's really cool. He knows a lot of stuff about bats, and trust me, he's going to make a very fun night, and people like bats just as with him. And just so you know, they are protected species here in the Caymanas, and the National Trust is proud to protect them. Thank you again. We do have refreshments in the other building. We just asked that wrap up at 7:20 because we do have to leave the building then. Unfortunately, we can't stay too long doing the refreshments, but we do have some nice refreshments for you provided by Foster. So thank you again for all your support tonight. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.